Hi, and welcome to Building a Software as a Service application with Rails. In episode 10, we are going to handle the second part of inviting users, and we're going to use devise invitable to accomplish this. Okay, so this is where we left off in episode 8. We have a list of authorized users, and so far we can only have one user on our application, and that's the owner. And we can see that their status is a confirmed user, well, because they are the owner. So what we're going to do in this episode is add a form down here where our owner can invite additional users to collaborate with them on the application. What we're going to be using is a gem called devise invitable. If you're familiar with devise, this is sort of just like an addition to devise that allows you to get up and running with invitations very easily. And it's going to work quite well in our application. You may want to give this documentation a quick read through before you get started with this episode. To get started, we're simply going to add the devise invitable gem to our gem file. And we'll have to update our devise version to 3.2 in order to use this release of devise invitable. The other few gems we're going to add here is letter opener, which will allow us to preview our emails in the browser so we don't have to actually send emails in development, and email spec, which will allow us to easily test our emails and follow links within our emails and things like that. I'm going to run bundle to install these gems, and then I'm going to run Rails generate devise invitable install. And what this will do is we'll update our devise initializer to have some extra configuration options for devise invitable. I suggest you read through those and customize them for your application. And then it will also generate the devise invitable locales file, which will allow us to update the Flash messages and stuff like that. After that, I'll run Rails generate devise invitable user, which will update our user model to use devise invitable, and it will also generate a migration for us that adds all of the necessary fields for devise invitable. After that's done, I'll just run db migrate and db test prepare to set up the databases. With devise invitable set up, I can now write a test that covers the user invitation. So I'm going to create a test called shows invitation when user is invited, because before the user accepts the invitation, we're going to show a message that says invitation pending. Before I write that test though, I'm going to move the sign user in and visit users path into the before block so that I don't have to repeat it in this other test. What I'm going to do is fill in the email address and click the invite user button, and then I will check that I get a message that the email was sent, and I will check for the invited user's email address, and I will check for the invitation pending text. A quick run of the tests shows that I don't have a field called email, so now we have to add the user invitation field on the users page. In the users index view, I'm going to paste in a invite user form right below our users table. This form is based on the devise invitable new invitation form, and it's going to point towards the user invitation path. And it's just going to have an email and a submit button. Another run of the tests shows that we don't have a host parameter specified, so our emails don't know where to link to. Typically, you would define your default URL host in an environment configuration file such as development or production.rb. Since we have differing subdomains for every person's account though, we'll have to dynamically set our default URL options. So we're going to do that in the application controller. So I'm going to add a before filter called set mailer host. And what it's going to do is check if there's a current account, and if there is, it's going to set the subdomain to the subdomain of the current account, and if not, it's just going to be a blank subdomain. And then finally, I'll just add this method call to the before filter. Running the tests again, I can see that I don't see the invitation pending text. Now, that's because we are being redirected to the hello, you can now track time page instead of the user's path, which I had anticipated. So all we need to do for that is go back into our users controller and overwrite the after invite path for method. Now when we overwrite this and set it to the user's path, devise invitable will redirect to the user's path after it creates the invitation. And after we've done this, we can see that all of our tests are now passing. Let's see what we've come up with. Our form looks nice here. It's asking us for an email, so when we input an email, we can see that an invitation has been sent, and we see the text invitation pending. So I think we're on the right track here. The only thing is we aren't actually able to test this right now because the email isn't really being sent. Let's see if we can get the letter opener gem that I mentioned earlier set up so that we can just preview the email in the browser. To get this gem up and running, all we need to do is change a couple parameters in the development.rb file. So we're going to first set our mailer to raise delivery errors. So that means if an email isn't able to be delivered, it will raise an exception so that we can see what happened and we can debug it. The second thing we need to do is set the config action mailer delivery method to letter opener, and this will make it use letter opener and give us a preview of the email in the browser. With that set up, let's try inviting another user. Awesome, so now it's opening up this additional window with a preview of the email. This isn't the best preview, but it works for our purposes. The one thing here is if you click the accept invitation, it's going to say that you're already signed in. So what you'll need to do is open an incognito window if you're using Chrome, or you could open this link in a different browser, or you could simply log out and then click the link. For now, what I'm going to do is just log out. So let's go back to the email, sign out over here, and then just open this up. And now it's asking us to set our password. Now, when we try to set our password, it's not going to work yet because the form actually isn't set up properly. Our user model is requiring a name field. We don't have the ability to input a name on this form, so we're not going to be able to save this user and set up their account. Let's see what we can do to clean this form up and allow the user to input their name here. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and generate our views. And again, if you're familiar with devise, this will seem pretty straightforward to you. We're going to just have it generate ERB files for us so we can overwrite our views and customize them to our needs. In particular, the file that we're going to look at is the invitation edit form, because that's the page that the user comes to when they have accepted the invitation. Before I go on and update the forms that were generated by devise invitable, I'm going to write an acceptance test around this to make sure that the behavior is what we expect. So I'm going to copy the first two lines from the test above, and we're going to fill in the email, and we're going to invite the user, and then we're going to sign out. And now we're going to use the email spec helper methods to check this email out. So we're going to open the email, and we're going to pass that the email address, and then we're going to visit an email, which means we're going to click the link called accept invitation. After that, that should bring us to the sign up or the add password and name form to complete the invitation. And we're going to fill in the name, password, and confirmation, and then we're going to click Create Account. After that, we're going to just expect the page to have some text that says your account was created successfully. Next up, I'm going to open up the spec helper file, and we're just going to add a few lines to set up email spec. We're going to first require email spec, and then we're going to include the email spec helpers and matchers. And then after each of our spec runs, we'll need to reset the mailer so that we don't get emails from other specs. Now, a run of the tests shows that we still have this error that's saying we need a name. Our name cannot be blank. So let's update the invitation form to add this name field. What I'm going to do is open the Edit Invitation view, and I'm going to paste in some code for an updated form. Now basically, the form is very similar. All we're doing is adding a name field, and we are using pretty much all of the same values for everything else. We're also adding a few bootstrap divs and styles around the form just to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'll go ahead and delete the form that devise generated for us. This time when I run the tests, I still get name cannot be blank. This time the error is due to the fact that we are not adding name to the strong parameters, permitted parameters. So we have to tell devise to allow the name. To configure our permitted parameters for devise, I'm going to paste in this method call configure permitted parameters. And this is going to call a method on the devise parameter sanitizer for accept invitation, and we're going to concatenate the name parameter on there. This is some devise magic. You can look at the devise wiki and readme if you want to know more about this. And we're going to call this method if it's a devise controller. Running the tests again, we can see we have a different error now. It's saying that it could not find the text, your account was created successfully. What it's actually saying is your password was set. What we're going to do is go into the devise internationalization file, and we're going to change this text to say your account was created successfully. And after we do that, we can see that finally all of our tests are now passing. Okay, let's try this again in the browser to see where we're at. I'm going to invite another user here, and then I'll sign out, and I will accept the invitation. Fill in these details. Great. It says my account was successfully created and I'm signed in. Now, despite the fact that the account was successfully created, we're still showing this invitation pending message. We should change that to a check mark. Before I go ahead and add that logic to change it to a check mark, I'm going to refactor this spec a bit to make it easier to add subsequent specs. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a describe block around the case where the user is invited. And this is going to allow me to pull out some duplication from the two specs that we have created already. So that's looking a little better already. The next thing I want to do is add a context section here for when the user actually accepts the invitation. So we can run through all the logic of accepting the invitation, and then after that we can just have some short little expectations about what has happened after that. So the new expectation that I'm going to add is that it shows a check mark on the user's page after the user confirms the invitation. So I'm going to visit the user's path, and then within the table row that contains the name of the person who signed up, I'm going to check that it has the glyph icon OK selector. So we can just use that to verify that they see a check mark. The next thing I'm going to do is open up my user helper, and we'll actually do the implementation of the user status. So what I'm going to do is just add an additional condition to this if statement that checks whether the user has accepted the invitation. So now if the user has accepted the invitation, or if they're the account owner, then we'll show that check mark in the view. And I can see that all of my tests are passing again. With that change, I can see that when I refresh the page, we have check marks for both users to confirm their status. The last thing that I want to tackle here is an invalid input for the user invitation. So if we just leave this blank, it takes us to this send invitation view where it says that our email can't be blank. This is okay, but the last thing I want to do is sort of just write a test around this and also clean this view up a little bit and make it consistent with our other views. Before I go ahead and implement that, I'm going to just put a spec around that so that we're aware of that functionality and we can expect it in the future. What I'm going to do is fill in the email with an obviously incorrect email address, and then I'm going to click invite user, and then I should land on the send invitation page with the message invalid. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and paste in a new view that I've constructed. It's pretty similar to the one that's already in this file, except that it's wrapped again in our nice bootstrap classes. And I'll go ahead and remove the old one. Okay, we're done with the invitation functionality, but there's just a couple more cleanup things that I'd like to tackle in this episode. Now we have this user's link displaying, and if you're not signed in, it really shouldn't display because it's just going to take you back to the sign-in form. So we'll go ahead and hide that for users that are logged out. So to hide that button, I'm simply going to move this user signed in conditional a bit further out so that it surrounds the user's path as well as the sign out button. The very last thing I want to do in this episode is add some CSS to style our form up a bit. What I want to do is color the check mark and add some margin to the top of the form. Typically what I try to do is set my CSS classes up so that they can be reused as much as possible. So I'm just going to create a file called typography where we can specify some generic typography classes that we might be able to reuse in other parts of our application. After that, I'll simply need to import that typography file. When we refresh the page here, we see that the user's link is gone, and when we sign in, we can see that the status checkmark is now green, and I've added a bit more margin on the invite user form. And I think that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks for watching.